Deep in the warm heart of a ship that had been crossing the dark for longer than anyone aboard could remember, there was a garden, and in the garden, on the night shift, there was Sela. The ship was one of the great slow ones, a whole small world sealed against the cold, carrying its people toward a shore that none of them would ever see, for the voyage was longer than a life, longer than many lives laid end to end. Those who had begun it were long gone. Those who would finish it were not yet born. And in between, there were only the quiet generations, keeping the ship, and keeping each other, and keeping the garden that fed them all and reminded them, with every green and growing thing, of the world they had left and the world they were bound for. Sela loved the night shift best. In the sleep hours, the great glass room was hers alone, warm and green and softly lit, with the slow stars turning in the black window, and the only sound the whisper of water in the pipes and the small settling of leaves. She moved along the rows with her watering can and her small sharp knife, tending as she went. Here were the beans climbing their strings, and the pale herbs, and the young fruit trees no taller than a child, that would be grown and giving fruit long after Sela herself was gone. That was the way of a garden on a ship such as this. You planted for people you would never meet. You tended what you would not live to harvest. It might have been a lonely thought, and on some nights it was, but mostly Sela found a deep, quiet gladness in it. It was a kind of faith, she thought, to press a seed into the soil aboard a ship that would not land for 200 years. It was a way of saying to the dark in the distance that you believed the shore was really there. There were other keepers all through the ship, of the water and the air and the long memory of where they were going, and none of them would arrive either. That was simply true, and had been true for every soul aboard since the very beginning, and would be true for a great many souls yet to come. And still the ship went on, patient and certain, because each generation did its small part and handed it, whole and living, to the next. Sela thought of it sometimes as a very long song, sung by people who would never hear how it ended, and who sang it anyway, and sang it sweetly, because the singing was the thing. It was on one such night, deep in the sleep hours, that she first heard the small sound of bare feet on the walkway, and turned and found the child. He was perhaps 8 years old, in his soft sleeping clothes, with his hair all on end and his eyes very wide, and he had plainly slipped out of the sleeping quarters where he most certainly ought to have been. He froze when she saw him, the way a young animal freezes, ready to bolt. Sela did not scold him. She only smiled and set down her watering can and asked him gently whether he could not sleep. He shook his head, and then, because children will tell you the truth if you do not frighten it out of them, he said that he had come to see the flower, the one that only opened once a year. His grandmother had told him about it before she went into the long sleep of her old age, and he had counted the days on his fingers all the long way round, and he was almost certain that it was tonight or near to it, and he had not been able to bear the thought of missing it. His grandmother, he said, had seen it bloom 4 times in the whole of her life, and had told him that each time was better than the last, and that a person ought to see it at least once while they were still young, so that they would have it to keep for later when they were old, and it had become someone else's turn to watch. He wanted very much to have it to keep. Sela understood that better than she could say. She had a great many such nights stored up inside herself, and on the hard days she took them out and looked at them, and they helped. Sela was quiet a moment. Then she said that yes, as it happened, he was very nearly right, and that if he was very quiet and did not tell the sleep warden who had let him roam, he might keep her company while they waited to see. The flower stood apart from the others, in a quiet corner beneath a pool of warm light, a tall and slender plant with a single closed bud at its crown, silver green and faintly luminous, folded up as tight as a sleeping hand. It had come aboard as a seed, Sela told the boy, from the world they had all left behind, so long ago now that the world itself was only a story. It bloomed but once each year for a single night, and then it closed again and gathered its strength and silence for the whole long turning of the next. No one was quite sure why it kept such careful time, but the gardeners had watched over it, one after another, all the length of the voyage, each passing the care of it to the next, so that in all the years of the crossing not a single blooming had gone unwitnessed. Not one, the boy asked in a hush. Not one, said Sela. Someone has always been here to see it. That is the promise we keep, we who tend this garden, that it should never open alone in the dark, with no one to say how beautiful it was. So they sat down together on the warm floor to wait, the old gardener and the small boy. And while they waited, Sela taught him things. She showed him how to tell when a plant was thirsty by the set of its leaves. She let him hold the small sharp knife and showed him how to take a cutting so gently that the plant would hardly know, and how that cutting, set in water, would put out roots of its own and become a whole new plant, so that one green thing might become 100 and 100 afield in the years to come. The boy listened with his whole self, the way that only children can, and he asked a great many questions, and Sela found that she did not mind a single one of them. It had been a long time, she realized, since anyone had asked her to explain the things she loved. She showed him the great water pipes that carried the same water round and round the ship forever. The very water, she said, that the first gardeners had drunk, and their gardens had drunk, cleaned and carried and given again and again, so that nothing aboard was ever truly lost, but only passed along. She showed him the little bees, kept drowsy and warm in their hive, that did the patient work of carrying the gold dust from one flower to the next. And she told him the names of things, the long proper names and the fond short ones the gardeners had given them over the years, until the boy's head was full of more names than he could hope to hold, though he tried, repeating them under his breath like a small and solemn prayer. Who taught you? The boy asked at last. The gardener before me, said Sela, and the one before her taught him, all the way back to the first, who left the last world with these seeds in her pocket. She smiled. It goes on like that. It has to. None of us will ever see the new world. So we plant and we teach and we pass it on. That is how the garden reaches a shore that no gardener ever will. It was very late or very early when at last it happened. The boy had grown drowsy against her shoulder, and Sela had nearly let him drift, where she felt him stir and stiffen and point. The bud was moving, so slowly that at first the eye could hardly trust it. The tight silver-green hand was unfolding, petal by petal, opening itself to the quiet dark. A faint light came from it as it opened, pale silver and soft gold, no brighter than a candle, and a scent came with it, clean and strange and sweet, a smell of a world that neither of them had ever walked upon and never would. The boy did not say a word. He only watched, with his whole heart in his eyes, the once-a-year flower opening in the deep of the ship's night, exactly as it had opened for the gardeners before them, all the long way back through the dark. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, the boy whispered. It is, Sela agreed. It always is. That is why we keep the promise. They sat with it a long while in its quiet light, while the stars turned slowly in the window. And Sela looked at the boy, at the wonder on his small, tired face, and at the careful way he had held the knife, and the eager way he had asked his questions, and she understood, without any sadness in it at all, that she had found the one who would come after her. Not tonight, not for many years yet, but one day this boy would stand in this warm green room in the deep of the night, an old gardener himself, teaching some other wide-eyed child how to take a cutting and pointing up at a silver bud, and saying, "It will open soon if we are only patient, and we must be here to see it, for it must never open alone." "Will you come back?" she asked him. "Tomorrow night. There's a great deal a garden needs, and I could use the help of someone who counts the days as carefully as you do." The boy nodded, once, with great seriousness, as though accepting a duty and not merely an invitation. And perhaps, Sela thought, it was a little of both. She thought of all the hands that had tended this quiet corner before her own, reaching back through the dark to a woman with seeds in her pocket and a whole lost world at her back. And she felt herself to be one link in a long and living chain, no greater and no smaller than any other. And she found that she was content to be exactly that. When at last she walked him back toward the sleeping quarters, the flowers still glowed behind them in its corner, pale and patient, keeping its one night of light. It would close again by morning and gather itself in silence, and wait out the whole long turning of another year, but would not be forgotten. The boy would count the days. And the ship went on through the dark, carrying its garden and its people and its long, unhurried hope toward a shore that no one aboard would ever see, but that someone, someday, surely would. And in the warm, green heart of it, the promise was kept and passed on, the way it always had been, from one pair of careful hands into the next. Wherever you happen to be tonight, and whatever quiet task is keeping your hands busy, thank you for spending this little while here with us. Rest easy, and whenever you are ready, there will always be another story waiting.